Hi all. In this video we will talk about converting an advantage in a Queen and Rook versus Queen and Rook ending. This is a position from the game of Caruana versus Elyanov in the 2016 Olympiad. Black to move. Caruana plays with white. Have a look at this position and try to determine who is better in this position. So first of all, we can see the material is equal. Both sides have a queen and a rook and 4 pawns, but actually white is better here. The reason is first that white has more active pieces. White has an active rook and queen, while black has more passive rook and queen. Second, black has an exposed king. This king is not so protected and is open to checks by the queen, whereas white's king is a little bit more protected. Third, white has 2 pawn islands and black has 4 pawn islands, and especially the pawn on e7, but potentially also the pawn on c6 can be weak. And fourth, if you compare the two passed pawns here and here, white has a passed pawn that is further advanced, that is further away from the kings. So in some endings, when the queen and the rook get exchanged and get off the board, this passed pawn might not be stopped by the black king, whereas this passed pawn could be stopped by the white king. So white is a little bit better here, or actually has these 4 things playing for him. But think about your practical games. In reality, those queen and rook endings tend to be very drawish, and it's very hard to convert an advantage here. There are many chances for black to equalize and save the position. So let's have a look at the game. Black played queen to d6 here, offering an exchange of queens, and actually if white were to take here, black could eliminate a few of his problems, because suddenly black has only 2 pawn islands, and suddenly it's also an advantage that the king can get into the game more easily, whereas the white king has to take a longer route here to get really active. So that's the reasoning behind queen d6. And of course, white does not exchange queens, but moves the queen away. Black again tries to offer an exchange of queens, eyeing the pawn on f2. Potentially the rook can come over here and create pressure on this line. And also, if white were to exchange the queens, black can either connect his pawns or move his king into the action more quickly. Have a look at this position, white to play. What might be a good move for white here? Okay, Caruana played queen to e3, and this is a good move because the motive here is to give your pieces more than one job. Have a look at this position here. White's queen has multiple jobs on this square. The first job is the queen protects the f2 pawn. So if black ever were to move his rook here to create pressure, the queen is already positioned well to protect the f2 pawn. Second, the queen is also eyeing the e7 pawn, which is weak and might be attacked. And in fact, the queen is now pinning the black queen to the defense of this pawn, because if the queen were to move somewhere else, white could take the pawn with check. And the third job is that the queen is still controlling the square c5 and thereby not allowing black to push this pawn forward. So queen e3 is a good move in this position because it's always a good idea to give your pieces more than one job. In this case, the queen fulfills 3 jobs on this square. Black plays rook to f8, tries to activate his pieces and also tries to give jobs to his pieces and to create pressure here on the f2 pawn. White plays rook to e4, pressuring the e7 pawn, and the rook defends the pawn. Second exercise in this video. Pause the video and try to find a good move for white. Caruana played rook to e5. And what is the idea behind this move? The motive here is that if you have a passed pawn, it's a good idea to coordinate your rook and your queen to push the passed pawn. So what this rook does is it controls the square a5 and coordinates with the queen to push this pawn forward. At the same time, the rook also, and that is the second motive, is also maintaining the pressure on the e7 pawn. So here the rook has only one job, which is to put pressure on the e7, and here the rook has 2 jobs. Okay, black tried to activate his pieces. You can see that both the rook and the queen slowly begin to occupy more active squares. And white now pushes the a5 pawn protected by the rook. Black tries to activate his pieces, queen d1 check, the king just moves away, queen a1. It's a good idea to position your queen behind, or your rook behind the passed pawn, so as this pawn moves forward, your queen remains active because it has a lot of squares, but is also attacking the pawn. So again, white to move, exercise number 3 in this video. Try to find a good move for white. Okay, Caruana played queen to e2. So what does that do? The motive is again to coordinate the rook and the queen to push the pawn. The queen performs the function of controlling the a6 square and supporting the pawn to move forward. Here the pawn cannot move forward because it would be taken by the queen, or the black queen on a1. And this move here, queen e2, maintains control of f2, but the queen gets a second job, which is to coordinate with the rook to push the pawn forward. Notice as well that white did not take this pawn here, just because this would simply be an exchange of pawns, and there's no reason for white to exchange those pawns. Okay, because of this, we can also understand black's next move. Black just pushes the pawn forward, again offering, inviting white to take it, so that black can take this pawn. Or put otherwise, black can easily move this pawn forward because it would be bad for white to take it, so in this way this pawn is protected, so to speak. Okay. White now can push his pawn forward because that was the purpose of the move queen e2, coordinating to push the pawn. And now this is already a position where white has created another resource in the position. Both white and black have had passed pawns, and white has now activated his rook and his queen a little bit. They occupy more active squares, and white had to allow this, but in exchange white created the resource of this pawn already being very much advanced, and if the queens and the rooks should somehow come off the board right now, the black king is far away from catching this pawn. So Caruana transformed one advantage, which is his active pieces, into another advantage, which is having a pawn that cannot be reached by the king anymore. So I would like to go back to the initial position. So if you play in your practical games and you have these active pieces, and black has the bad pieces, that is good, but it is only good so long as you are able to, while black activates his pieces, if you are able to do something with this time, which in this example is to create the resource of this pass pawn that cannot be stopped by the king should the rook and the queen come off the board. Very instructive how Caruana did this. And let's be honest, in this position, if you had a position like this on the board, it's not so easy unless you are an experienced grandmaster to really transform and convert this position into a one game. And here we can learn how Caruana did this, exchanging the active pieces against the pawn. Okay, black tries to activate his pieces, and the queen is active here, and also controls the a7 square, so that black cannot in the next move again somehow coordinate his pieces with this or with other moves. Okay, now white takes the pawn and is now a pawn up. White is now ready to grab this advantage because the pawn is protected by the queen. Black now himself gets ready to push the pawn, so black also tries to convert to generate some resources and some advantage here. And this is exercise number 4 in this video. Try to find a good move for white. Okay, Caruana played rook to e7 here. And the motive is that, again, the rook supports the push of the pawn, and the rook and the queen coordinate together to allow the pawn to be pushed forward. Why are they coordinated? Well, they're coordinated because if the rook takes here, the queen can come in here, gives a check first of all, and then the queen is still here, taking the place of the rook, coordinating with the rook in this way so that the pawn can be pushed forward. So rook e7 coordinates, the motive is to coordinate the pieces to push the pawn forward. Okay, what can black do here? Black gives a check here, desperately trying to break the coordination of the pieces, to give some extra protection to the rook, and to make sure that a move like this can break the coordination of this pawn here with the queen, and to give a check as well. So f3, white simply reacts to the check, and now black continues pushing his pawn, breaking the coordination of the queen with this pawn, and following the plan to push this pawn forward. Okay, have a look at this position here. It's exercise number 5 and the last exercise in this video. What can white do here? What's a good move for white and what's the motive behind it? Pause your video and try to find the best move for white. Okay, the best move for white, and what Caruana played in the game, is rook takes f7 check. And what is the motive behind this move? Why in this position you would now want to exchange your rook? The motive here is that if you can simplify the game, simplifying means exchanging pieces, simplify the game into a one basic ending. So white just took the rook and black is in check, and black has to take the rook, otherwise he's material down, and he has only two choices to do this. The first choice is king f7, and this is a lost basic ending because white can now move queen to a2, allowing to push supporting the pawn to push forward, and the king cannot come here to support, and it's only 2 moves that this pawn has until it queens. So somehow the queen has to now do something, either in this move or in the next move, has to do something to protect the pawn. There's also no check here that the queen can give because the white queen prevents the black queen to do this. So black can play any move. In the next move, the queen has to move away to come close to stopping this pawn. And at this moment, white will be able, and this is the point why king takes f7 is losing. At this moment, the queen here the white queen will be able to take c4 with check. Because the king takes on f7, this pawn here will fall with check. So let's have a look at a few moves. Let's say black tries to bring in the king a bit closer. White just pushes the pawn. At this moment, the black queen is forced to move away, and white can take with check here. And now, if the black king moves closer, white can move here, and the queen cannot take, because then black would lose the queen. So the king approaches, tries to catch this pawn, but now white can simply exchange the queens, and this is a 1 ending. Black gets this pawn, but white has 3 pawns against 2 and wins the game, and the black king is far away. Okay, so this is why black cannot take with the king here, because then the pawn here falls with check. Okay, so that leaves only one other opportunity, to take with the queen, and this is also what happened in the game. White can play queen e5 check, and this is won because first, any exchange of queens in this position leads to a situation where the white pawn is much quicker than the black pawn, so the queens cannot be exchanged. First, second, if the king moves on any square on the 8th rank, white has the resource, let's say here, white has the resource of check, which does 2 things. It gives a check, and the king just has to move back, or the queen has to move in between, which is then again an exchange of queen, and this white pawn is quicker than the black pawn. And if the king moves back, then the queen on b2 or on b8 has the function not only to give check, but also to support this pawn, and this pawn will queen. So that's why in this position here, the only choice for black is to move to h6. And this is lost because on king h6, white suddenly has another motive, which is a mating attack. Queen e3, king moves back, queen to d4, king has to move back to h6 because of all the other motives before. And now white pushes the pawn to a7. The queen is forced to drop back to protect, to control a8. And now white has the resource h4, which is a mating attack. White is now threatening lots of mates here with a lot of combinations. Basically, the story is that the black king is caged in. There will be some mating attack. There's not much that black can do against it. In fact, black could push this pawn, but then it's mate immediately here. Or otherwise, yeah, black can do anything. Let's say black pushes the pawn, then there's the check here, and the mate here. And any queen move gives up the control of this square here. So white combines the two motives of a mating attack with the second motive, the passed a7 pawn. So let's go back a little bit. In this position here, which was the exercise, taking the rook, the motive is simplify in a one basic ending. At some point you have pushed all your resources, you've generated the resource of the pawn here, you have good coordination between your pieces, and now you have to calculate and find the right opportunity to simplify into a one ending. And this right opportunity in this position here is exactly taking the rook on f7. And by the way, this is what happened in the game. And here Elyanov resigned and Caruana took home the full point. And to get to this position from this initial position, I think was very instructive to demonstrate how as white you can convert your advantages that you have into this position into one position by all the motives that we were talking about in this video. Giving your pieces more than one job, coordinating rook and queen to push the pawn, and simplifying into a one basic ending. Thanks a lot for watching.